DCPS Card and the CineTech Geek, and in today's video we're going to talk about how to ensure your equipment is safe during an extended closure period. Now we are in a different environment now, uncharted territories in terms of cinemas being closed for up to 6 months, possibly longer, we don't know, and there's a lot of expensive equipment. Cinemas are partly specialised IT infrastructure these days, so you've got a lot of very specialised equipment that needs special care. Now, in front of me you can see is an old GDC DCI Player, and I've taken the top off and I'm going to show you something, the secure media block inside it. Now, just to go on, all DCI players, even the small ones you place into the side of projectors, are really all based around the same technologies. This is for Series 1 projectors with the old SDI cables, and the newer media blocks have all been compressed onto a little card that can fit into the machine. Still has the hard drives and the media block in it, as you'll see here today. But I had this spare and I could put it on the desk and show it to you. Now, in all DCI media players, and this is why it's very specialised and why we have to take special care as a cinema when it comes to extended closure. Now, the reason I'm making this video because I actually wrote a very brief letter to the small cinema owners in Australia as part of the association there, where I explained to them on this sort of why this is occurring. Now, as a CineTech Geek, I wanted to get a little bit more technical and show you more depth and talk about it in more depth as to why you need to take care of your equipment. So let's just talk about this equipment first. So as DCI equipment, we have secure media blocks in them, or media blocks in them. Now, what is that? So I've got this player here, and I've actually got the main part of it. It's this part here, right? This card, right? So that's just really a computer. You get the DCPs and the data gets onto here. It runs an operating system, and the operating system talks to this main card here, and this is the special card. This special card has the J2K decoder on it, and has the decryptor on it, and it has the watermarking technology on it. So the only thing that goes in is encrypted content. The only thing that comes out is image with watermarking technology on it, right? Also SnearLink if you're using SDI in this case, so it's encrypted, but usually it's encrypted all the way down into the actual projector device, right? So this card does all that. So there's a lot of magic happening inside this secure area here. Now, the way that happens is that, we talk about encryption like, if you're surfing the web now and you've got SSL or HTTPS and a little lock on the top of your web page, that's using a similar sort of encryption, a public key pair. You've got a private key and a public key. And similar to that, that's what's on this board here. There's a sort of private certificate which, when something is encrypted, it's addressed to this particular device. And if you had that certificate, you could pretend to be this device and you could decode the content. So that obviously is protected under this score, under this very specialised protection. It's what's called FIPS compliant, which is like a very high grade sort of security compliance that you'd commonly see that governments are using, or military, etc. Alright, so now this is obviously always running. There's a battery here. This is the battery here, a very big battery here to power this on all the time. So it's actually, even though I've plugged it out and I've unplugged it and I'm holding it here, it's still running in there, keeping track of what's going on. If I scratch it, if I fiddle with the battery or anything like that, it'll disarm and delete that very special certificate inside the card to protect the fact that nothing could get that private certificate and pretend to be this machine. So it's a very, very big reason. Security is a very, very, very important factor of being in cinema and exhibition. We need to protect the content, make sure it doesn't get pirated, and protect the windowing and all that sort of stuff as cinema exhibitors. So yes, that's one of the reasons why these extended closure periods are very important, because if you haven't maintained your batteries properly, they may not charge the board properly, and you may turn it off for 6 months, and when you come back to turn it on, it may have disarmed itself. So if you have equipment which is quite old, there's certain recommendations. In a link below, I'll leave you the link that points to the SCO letter that talks about this, and in there is all the links to all the manufacturers and their recommendations on how often to change the batteries and other recommendations in terms of what you should do in a closure period. But in general, if you have quite old equipment, it is recommended you turn it on for 3 hours to overnight at least every month, and possibly every week if you're more paranoid. I know some people who actually will do it every week, but that's what the recommendations are. Now, there you go. That's why us as exhibitors with very specialised IT infrastructure, that's what we are now, we're a specialised IT infrastructure business. We really rely on that sort of thing, and we must be educated and get really on top of those technologies going forward. But just branching off into other more general topics in terms of closure periods, not necessarily counting towards exhibitors, but anyone who has a lot of equipment, computers that they rely on for their business to run. When you change to a different servicing model, which means you don't turn it on every day, you only turn it on every month or every 6 months, every time you turn equipment on, the components heat up and cool down, heat up and cool down. And if you leave them off for, especially old equipment for a long period of time, there are certain chemical reactions that can happen in the capacitors, and if they're quite old capacitors, it could induce them to basically popping or expiring and no longer being serviceable. Obviously that would mean the equipment is gone, it needs to be replaced or repaired, and that can happen to any equipment that's over 10 years old. Capacitors are, typical capacitors on any computer equipment is rated between 15 and 20 years in general if it's treated in the correct environment and a good quality capacitor. So it's not unlikely or out of the question to have the occasional 10-year life cycle of a capacitor. I've had it in quite a few equipment here and there. So one of the ways to keep that equipment optimal and running as long as possible is just to keep it with the same duty cycle, doing the same thing, so don't change it so much, or go to, like I said before, weekly turn on and off, so it's a similar duty cycle. Or, so you need to be aware of those sort of issues, and if you are going to be closed for 6 months, and when you open, you want to make sure that none of those issues don't hit you when you open and you're down for another couple of weeks, right? So make sure you keep the equipment relatively up to date, and if you are going to hit a fault, you hit it in the middle of a period where you can fix it before it becomes a critical issue and could affect you opening up your business when the closure period ends. So that's some really good advice for exhibitors and everyone in general. And finally, I want to talk about one last thing, is UPSs. As cinema owners, we have lots of UPSs for our screens. Now, talking about UPSs for a sec, I've been meaning to make a video on UPSs for quite some time. So UPSs are quite strange. Like, in general, my rule of thumb is that I never power down my UPSs, but there's quite a few cinema owners that I know, because they're in bigger buildings, etc., and when they turn to close off at night, they have a big switch and the whole circuit board crunch, and the whole production floors are powered down, and that means even the UPSs are powered down. UPSs aren't really designed to be powered down. He's had quite a lot of, the person I know who has a lot of UPSs and treats them this way, he's had a lot more problems with his UPSs than anyone else I know. Most of the other ones, you keep them on all the time, they just work beautifully. And that's another thing I'd recommend. Keep your UPSs charged if you can. It's better for them and the batteries, etc., if they are kept powered all the time. And that goes for everything, really. If you want equipment to last the most length of time that it can, you basically leave it on all the time, because if you aren't cooling it down and heating it up every day as you turn it on and off, that expansion and contraction obviously does have it does wear on the equipment quite a bit. So if you just keep it on all the time in a good environment, and it's the same all the time, the equipment will run for the longest period that it can. So that's just a few little tidbits of information to help you as a cinema owner or as a business owner dealing with the computer equipment on these unusual times of the virus and the closure periods. Anyway, that's James Gardner, the Cinema Tech Geek. Bye for now.